All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the macro and policy session. My name is Jennifer Adair. I am the Vice President of the Social Work Student Association. And if this is your first session and you're trying to get a CEU, if you wouldn't mind putting your name in the chat so we can get that to you. And there will also be an evaluation at the end. And today we will be hearing from Dr. Bragg and Dr. Blatt. And Dr. Bragg is up first, and he is a social work professor at the Tulsa site of the OU. And he also works as a researcher at the Hope Research Center. So Dr. Bragg, I will give it to you and you can take it away.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. And thank you. That seems weird calling you Jennifer. Thank you, Jenna. That sounds a little bit more normal for me. But thank you for having me today. Usually I get asked to talk about macro social work jobs. It's an area that I am very passionate about because macro social work is where social work started. However, there are very few of us that still work in macro social work. Most people have migrated to clinical. And for those of you who have been in any class with me, when I introduce myself, I usually thank the class that 3/4 of you are going to become clinical social workers. And I am grateful for that because that means there will always be a spot for macro social workers. So for those of you who are clinical, thank you. However, it is very frustrating for those of you who want to be a macro social worker to find jobs. It is horribly frustrating. I went through that when I was in the program to the extent I almost left the program just because I'm like, why did I choose this? This is so not for me. I don't want to do clinical. Macro jobs exist. You just really have to know how to find them. And as my computer is shaking, I should probably warn you. I have a therapy dog that's usually on campus, but he went to daycare today, so he is asleep on my lap. So if it shakes, it's not an earthquake, he's kicking the desk. So I just want to throw that out there. With that, I'm going to see if I can, and I can, yay. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. Okay. And also for those of you who don't know me, if it's got to do with Hawaii, I'm all about it. So that's why the turtle's there. So we're going to talk about macro social work and those jobs that are a little bit harder to find. So when you look for macro social work jobs, or let's just back that up for a second. When you look for social work jobs, what terms do you normally use? What have you discovered? So very quickly, you can type it in the chat window if you want, but what terms do you use when you're looking for jobs since you're in school to be a social worker? Nonprofit, that's one I don't normally see that pop up in this discussion. That's a great one. Social worker, social work, those are the big ones. When you look for those, to save some time here, I can tell you what you're probably going to find. And you're going to find one of two variations of LCSW required or licensed eligible, meaning they want you to have your LMSW so you can go down that track. Surprisingly, when you use the term social work or social worker, I would say probably about 90% of the jobs are going to be clinical. Even when you read that job description, and it seems like it's very much a meso or a macro social work job, it's at an organization that does a lot of clinical social work. So if they're looking for a social worker, they put in that job description, you have to have your LCSW, even though you're not doing therapy. So it adds to a little bit of that frustration. So that brings me to this first question. To be licensed or not to be licensed? You can probably tell where that was paraphrased from historical literature, but to licensed or not to be licensed, it's a really good question. I would say it's going to depend upon what your end goal is. Some of you may have noticed after my name, there is an LMSW, so I have started that licensing process. But I am also very honest, and I will tell you that is because that's always been my fallback. Having gotten my master's degree and my PhD, I knew I wanted to work in academia. but I'm also currently place bound where I need to stay in Oklahoma. So that doesn't mean there's always going to be an academic job. So I needed to go down that route of possibly having a very quick fallback if I couldn't find a teaching job. So I've started that process. However, if you want to work in meso-social work, macro social work, there is not, and I repeat, there is not a need to get licensed. You can still call yourself a social worker. You can't call yourself a clinical social worker, but you are a social worker. That also being said, if you think there's a chance that you may work for one of those nonprofits that prefer it, I would recommend you getting your LMSW sooner than later because all that information is fresh when you graduate. And then just maintain your LMSW. That way, if you're in a macro job at a nonprofit that wants you to have your LCSW, you can quickly go that route. So my response is that licensed or not to be licensed. And it's not to take anything away from clinical, but it's a great fallback if you can't find the perfect macro job. Or you found the perfect agency where you want to do macro, but they have a clinical opening. You can go that route and get in the door. So I would say there is benefits to getting licensed, but you don't have to get your license. And I cannot stress that enough. So how do you search for these macro jobs? They are elusive, but the one thing I would say is think about what macro social workers do, or what are our roles. And Dr. Blatt's going to talk about some of that in a little bit, but think about those things you probably heard maybe in, and there goes my desk horribly shaking. Think about those things that you probably heard in an intro to social work class, or that intro to professional social work. You're a change agent, you're a problem solver, a critical thinker, an activist, an organizer, an advocate or advocators, even politicians. There's really not job openings for politicians, but you can run. You can work for politicians. There are job openings there. It's not out of the ordinary for a social worker to become a lobbyist. You can be a writer. You can be a researcher. When you search for those particular terms, you're still probably not going to find a lot. I would be hard pressed to find a job with the title of change agent. Activist, maybe. Planner, you're liable to get more urban planning jobs, which you could be qualified for. So you need to really think about what are the roles, or what are the tasks that you do, and now how can you assign a job description title to those tasks. So try searching for these. So community organizer, field organizer, community educator, program specialist. The director one gets to be a little bit tricky. If you just put in director, you're liable to get a whole host of odd jobs. So be thinking about what are those words that go with it: assistant, executive, associate, director, and put one of those with the word director. Legislative aid, outreach specialist, planning and program development. That's going to give you a lot of grant writing style jobs, generally speaking. Community outreach. I want to show you a couple community outreach jobs a little bit later. Grants and development. In social work, and when you're putting it with grants, development is always going to be grant writing or funding. Membership coordinator, program evaluation, research specialist, research analyst. My favorite one is this one right here, social science research analyst. That is actually a federal job title. About a year and a half ago was the last time I saw it pop up on the USA Jobs website, and it was doing social science research at the Hart Office Building in Washington, D.C. for the United States Congress. Salary starts at $100,000 to $120,000 a year, plus cost of living. And dependent upon your background, some of you may have to take 1 or 2 statistics classes to really qualify for it. But dependent upon what electives you took, what your undergrad was in, what stats classes you took in undergrad, you may have those requirements. But you could literally qualify for that $100,000 a year job, but it will never show up if you put in the word social worker. This last one, and you'll notice there's a little asterisk after it. Think academic discipline. And I do this a lot just because when I get bored, I start looking at jobs. Not that I plan on leaving, but it seems to be like my habit. Some people spend hours on Zillow looking at houses. I just surf Indeed and USA Jobs because it's just really good at killing time and I can see what's out there for my students. So think about your academic discipline aside from social work, sociology, political science. Psychology can get you a lot of really good jobs, but it's also going to pull up the clinical ones. It's sort of that catch-all like the word social work. Social science is a really good one to throw in there. And you will find all sorts of jobs that have the word social science in their job description, in their educational requirements, and none of them have anything to do with social work. But when you look at those jobs, they're perfect for what you want to do in macro social work. So I think it was last week I did this. I was playing around with some of these job titles and I searched for some jobs. Here's a community outreach associate. It's not necessarily local. It's in St. Louis. St. Louis is nice. You're talking about on the requirements. And I know you may not be able to read this, so I'll go over some. A bachelor's of arts or bachelor's of science degree. They want you to be outgoing and friendly, have a strong business acumen. They never really specify what that is, but excellent interpersonal communication skills. Does that sound like a social worker? Aside for individuals that know me on a personal basis, and I'm rather introverted, generally speaking, that sounds like a social worker. Ambitious and self-motivated, strong sense of character, altruistic social work, persistent and tenacious. You're going to school to be a social worker. If you haven't learned how to do those two, you will. That being said, this is a nonprofit that's in multiple metropolitan areas. This one happens to be in St. Louis, and they're focused on housing solutions. 36, which is a low end, to $54,000 a year. Does not come up if you search for the term social worker. This one is local. And when I found this, it had only been up for a couple days. So this job is still relatively recent. It's probably still open. Planned Parenthood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's grant writer and compliance assistant. So when you look at the responsibilities, draft and submit grant applications and narratives, dependent upon what classes you've taken, what you've done in your practicum, you will have that experience. You need to be able to engage departments so they can understand the importance of reporting to funders. That in itself is a whole nother art form. Advance one more. Need to be able to do literature searches, supporting development of staff, managing the grants calendar, assist with development and distribution of grant management documents. So we're talking about grant writing, program compliance, requirement, bachelor's degree or equivalent experience, check. 1 to 3 years grant compliance or writing experience. Again, that's going to be dependent upon what you did at your internship, what you did before your master's degree, what classes you have taken. You can probably get that experience. This is just a computer software program called Razor's Edge. Grant and individuals use it. You can do that training online. So here we're talking about $21 to $24 an hour. So $44,000 to $51,000 a year in Tulsa, macro social work. You don't need an LCSW. But you're not going to find it if you look for the word social work. This one's in Oklahoma City. Drug court coordinator. You already have all the requirements for this one. $42,000 to $50,000 a year. Being the coordinator for the drug court down in Oklahoma City. Who wants state benefits? This is a state job, working as a cessation, I could never say that word. You're getting people to quit smoking as a system consultant. So when you're looking at what the duties are, serving as a first line content expert and point of contact to public-private partnerships, as well as sustainability. You're going to train and educate Oklahoma State Department of Health employees and staff. You're going to maintain and enhance the program's knowledge, skills, and abilities. You're going to support the Oklahoma Tobacco Control Program goals, objectives, and activities. So let's look at these requirements. Bachelor's degree in public health, community health, social work. When you go to their preferred qualifications, master's degree in public health, human relations, social work. When you go through their knowledge and skills, you have all of those knowledge and skills when you graduate this program. State benefits, $52,000 a year. This one probably would show up if you search the word social work, but you're going to have to go through 150 other ads that are LCSW. So the point of this is never, ever look for the word social work or social worker if you want a macro job. So what does this mean for your student debt? On average, and this is average, I would say it's a low average. This was a couple years ago. Most MSW students have around $60,000 in student debt. And we don't get paid a lot as social workers. Macro social workers can get paid pretty well right out the door if you can find the job. That being said, not only can you get paid rather well, most of those macro jobs, and in fact, this year, all of the ones I just showed you, would qualify for the Public Student Loan Forgiveness Program. Once you're in that, after you've made 120 qualified payments, so 10 years, the balance of your student loans will be forgiven. It's a whole program you have to go through. They'll consolidate your loans and go to a different provider. That's a long-winded process. I myself am in that process because I work at OU. OU qualifies. Macro jobs can still get that benefit. You'll see it listed all the time in LCSW jobs. Macro jobs get it too. This is where you're going to have to work. And as a social worker, this feels icky. It feels awkward. You've got to sell yourself. And selling yourself does not mean selling your soul. You're more than welcome to sell your soul, but I would rather you not. Just sell yourself. You're going to need to be prepared to justify why an MSW qualifies you for the job. A lot of the jobs, a couple of the ones I showed you today actually mentioned social work, but a lot of them will have no mention at all to social work. They may have said a bachelor's or a master's degree in sociology, public administration, public health, education. You're going to have to explain to people what a social worker is, what skills you have are transferable, what courses you've taken, how your internship prepared you for that job. You're going to have to connect the dots. Employers and macro jobs, especially since they're not looking for a social worker, are going to have the same concept of what a social worker does as most of the people you told when you came into this program. Hey, I'm going to go to school to be a social worker. And what did they say? You want to work for DHS? And for those of you who work for DHS, not knocking that, but that's what everybody thinks every social worker does. Or you want to be a therapist. You're going to have to connect those dots. You need to network with professionals who are not social workers. If you're only networking with social workers, when they hear about jobs, what are they going to be? Clinical social work jobs. You need to network with people like Dr. Blatt, who is very much, I would argue, a macro social worker, even though his degree is not in social work. That's what you're angling to do. You will be competing with individuals graduating from his program, the MPA department. That's where macro social workers work. You're going to have to connect the dots because city employers, county employers, the states, nonprofits, they may not get it. So I usually say have some sort of a cover letter where you can connect the dots for them. Paint by numbers. Don't assume they know what a social worker is. I'm trying to be respectful of the time, so I'm right at my 20 minutes. So we can shift now to Dr. Blatt, and then we can come back for questions, I assume.
Oh, actually, if anybody has questions for you, do you mind if we ask them now?
No, I can do it either way. I just wanted to make sure I only took 20 minutes so I didn't run over Dr. Blatt's time.
Okay, so if anybody wants to throw their question in the chat or unmute themselves to ask Dr. Bragg any questions related to macro or anything like that, feel free.
And I did notice Austin put in the chat box, there are a couple of the social science research analyst positions currently open at USA Jobs.
Yes.
Those are great jobs, even for Dr. Blatt's people in MPA. If they don't know about that job, they should really look.
I have a question, Dr. Bragg. This is Elizabeth. So I'm going into the master's program from the first cohort of the bachelor's in Tulsa, and I'm looking for like tribal, federal, macro level jobs, and the ranks that like equivalent with my master's degree, it's really high up there. And so are government jobs just like that, or should I start like at a lower rank if you're wanting to get on with like tribes and federal government just to get in the door?
That is why the federal jobs pay well. And I can give you the example of, if you are a medical social worker at St. John's, you generally make less than a nurse. But if you are a medical social worker at the VA, you have a tendency to make more than a nurse. And it's because the federal government bases their job structure by your degree. So if you have all of the educational requirements and the work experience, they will hire you in at one of those higher level job rankings. They will look at all of your qualifications. And if it says like a GS7 to a GS11, based upon your qualifications, they'll hire you. It's somewhere in that scope of practice. So if you're wanting to apply for a higher GS job because you have those qualifications, just because it seems like a high salary doesn't mean don't apply for it. It's just they're paying for your education. They're one of the unique employers that actually will reward you for having a master's degree in social work. They will pay you accordingly to having a master's degree because if you have a master's degree in public health, you're going to make the same as you would if you have a master's degree in social work. Most fields, that's not the case. The government will. So yeah, I would say apply for those jobs, even if it seems $100,000. There's no way I can make that as an MSW. Apply. You
Thank
can.
you. I just feel less competent, ready to graduate than I did when I started college.
So yeah, I would definitely say, in those federal jobs, if you're in your last year of your program, like your master's program, I would start applying if you're wanting the federal jobs, because it literally can take a year to get hired. So start that process early.
I have a question kind of in the same vein. I've noticed when I look for macro jobs that they require like a lot of experience, or I don't know if I'm looking at the right term. Is there like a good entry level term that we can look for in addition to the terms you showed us?
Well, I would say
like research and government.
Yeah, I would say it's just like everything else. Even like if you're looking for a clinical social work job, when you look for clinical, you're going to have various ones that say entry level or 1 to 2 years experience, some that says 4 or 5. Even some of these field organizers and community organizing jobs, they want very minimal experience. The organizers, the coordinators, and even the educator jobs that were on that list, those are ones that are really good to get, because you have that experience even in your practicums. You have those experience in your classroom activities, and a lot of you bring in those experiences prior to your MSW. So I would say the organizers, the educators, and even the coordinator jobs are great. Some of the grants and development jobs want very minimal experience, like 1 year. And if you've done that in your practicum, I have practicum students who have written grants and have gotten grants funded in their practicum. I've got one right now that did that. So you do have that experience. You just have to think outside of the box.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, if we don't have any more questions for Dr. Braggs, we will turn it over to Dr. Blatt. He was the former executive director of the Oklahoma Policy Institute. And like Dr. Braggs was saying, he is a professor in the public administration program. So Dr. Blatt, I will let you take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Jenna. And thank you to all of the MSW students who have taken the time to participate today. So Jenna asked me to talk about some advocacy strategies that social workers can use to get a bill passed. So as Jenna mentioned, I served as the executive director of the Oklahoma Policy Institute, which is a state-based policy think tank that works on expanding opportunities for low-income Oklahomans through research and advocacy. So worked closely with the legislature for a couple of decades. And every year, OK Policy had a legislative agenda, typically an unpopular or somewhat unpopular legislative agenda, because we were trying to expand opportunities and or at least prevent bad bills from passing, affecting low-income people in the state. We worked closely with social workers, frequently were part of the day at the Capitol that was organized by NASW. So one of the things that we did at OK Policy was we created a advocacy arm of our organization called Together Oklahoma, which focused on doing advocacy work. So I'm going to try to speak for 10 or 15 minutes, and hopefully that'll leave a little bit of time at the end for questions and discussions. So whenever we talk about how to be an effective advocate, often enough, the ways that most people, there's two ways that most people get involved in the legislative process. And they're both important, but not sufficient. The first is by voting, which I hope all of you are registered to vote and vote regularly in primary elections and general elections every 2 years, or if you're looking at the local level, more often. And then the other thing that the people do is there's a bill that you're following, your organization is engaged on the issue, and they send out an urgent action alert to all their members saying that House Bill 1234 is going to be up on the Senate floor tomorrow. Please send an email to all these legislators, asking them, urging them to vote no on House Bill 1234, and here are 2 talking points. And those are both voting and emailing all the legislators are important ways to have a voice, but they're certainly not exclusive or the most effective. Really what you need to be doing if you're going to have an impact on the legislative process and be able to advance issues that are of concern to you. And I'm guessing all of you who've made the commitment to be social workers do have issues that concern you as individuals, as family members, and professionally. You have issues that are near and dear to your heart. The key to all of this is developing a relationship with your legislators. So the very first thing to know is who your legislators are. So just wondering through reactions, if you could give a thumb up or a yes if you know who your 2 state legislators are, or even if you know one, your House member, your state representative, or your state senator. How many of you know? I can't see everybody, and most of your cameras aren't on, so if you can just, actually that's pretty good. We've got a good, I'm going to go to the other screen. So we've got maybe half dozen, but most of you don't. And in fact, most people in Oklahoma, the vast majority, have no idea who their House member is, their state House member, state representative. So what I'm going to suggest is it really is a 3-stage process that you should be thinking about. First is there is important work that you can do before legislators are even elected. So for the Oklahoma legislature, there are elections every 2 years, even numbered years in November. Candidates file for office in April, and then you have primary elections in June and runoffs in August, and general elections in November. There is a lot that you can do before candidates are even elected, where you can begin to develop a relationship and begin to get the issues that you care about in front of the candidates for office. So you can attend the candidate forum in your district. You can attend a fundraising event if somebody you know is hosting an event for a candidate. An important thing that you can do is make a campaign contribution. If there's a candidate out there who you know you support or you think may support, or who you even may not support but you think is going to win, I know that nobody in this group is likely to max out and make a $2,700 or $5,000 donation. But guess what? If you can make a $25 donation to a candidate, that still makes you a donor. And it still means that if that candidate is elected and you contact them, you can say, I was a contributor to your campaign and I would like to meet you. So even a nominal amount that is comfortable to you is helpful. You can also volunteer for a campaign. Every campaign is looking for people who will help knock on doors, stuff envelopes, do mailers. That's all really important. So even before somebody's elected, you can begin to develop the relationship and you can begin to talk to the candidates about the issues that are important to you. Second thing you can do, once they're elected in November. Legislative session doesn't start until January. You can call their office in Oklahoma City, and it's easy enough to off the internet to get their phone number or email addresses, and ask to set up an appointment to meet with your legislator in their district. Most legislators will make themselves available, whether it's a Friday morning or late afternoon or Saturday, and say that you're interested and here's the issue you want to talk to them about. I'm going to give as an example, we have a long-standing wait list for home and community-based services for children with developmental disabilities. I'm sure many of you have heard about the wait list. So let's say you are the parent of a child on the wait list, or a sibling, or it just is of importance to you. So if you set up a meeting, you can talk to them, introduce yourselves, find out about them, find out what their interest is, see where you may have connection, and talk to them about the issue that you care about. If you have even one meeting or a couple of contacts with the legislature, you can easily be their go-to person on the issue that you care about. So that when a bill about developmental disabilities comes up, they may actually reach out to you. If you reach out to them, they'll know that you're in interest. That can apply to mental health issues. That can apply to issues around physical disabilities, substance abuse, whatever it is. If you talk to a legislator, even a couple of occasions, you can establish yourself as an expert on the topic. The other thing you can do before session starts, it's pretty quick. They have to submit bill requests by December, but between the time they're elected in December, you can ask them to carry a bill. So maybe you want to suggest to your legislator that they submit a bill that would require the Department of Human Services to create a new priority system for families on the wait list. So children with the highest acuity levels would get served first. You can talk to them. Many bills that are introduced in the legislature are constituent request bills. And if you can make a convincing case for why this is important to you, how it touches you personally, then a legislator may be quite willing to actually introduce a bill and be your spokesperson in the legislature. When you meet with them, don't leave unless you have their cell phone number. Most legislators will share that, and that in that case, When you have concerns about issues, you can be contacting them, texting them, or calling them, and they will sometimes reach out to you and say, hey, there's this bill here. I know you're really interested in substance abuse issues. There's this bill, you know about it. What do you think? They'll ask you for that, for your expertise. Then the third stage is during session. Hopefully you've already begun to establish a relationship. You've met your legislators personally in the district, but during session, there's a lot of ways to communicate with the legislator. You can email them and call their office. Whenever you do that, you should always specify that you're a constituent. And if you voted for them or if you contributed to their campaign, don't be shy to say that. They will pay more attention and take you more seriously if you can say that I'm your constituent and I voted for you. But that is not essential. They will still listen. They will listen less if you're just contacting all the legislators, including those who are not their constituents. The other thing that's also an important strategy is going to the Capitol and meeting them in person. Now, during session, you can still meet them in the district. They only work Monday to Thursday, so many of them take time on Fridays and over the weekends to have meetings. So that's advisable. But if you're able to get to Oklahoma City, you can call their office and set an appointment in advance. I have to say, they're not very reliable about keeping appointments simply because they never know exactly what the legislative schedule is going to be and what things may come up. So even if you don't have an appointment, you can still go and come to their office. And sometimes it involves waiting for a while, but generally you can get in to see them and they will give you 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or sometimes 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Be prepared to be brief and assume that you're only going to have a few minutes to talk to them. So it's important when you do talk to a legislator, if you have from your association on your own, if you have some talking points that you can leave with them, a one-page handout is helpful. But practice an elevator speech. Practice that 15, 30, 45-second summary to say, Senator Smith, I'm very concerned about House Bill 1234, which would restrict eligibility for pregnant women for Medicaid coverage. I myself was on Medicaid when I was pregnant, and it made all the difference. Here's some statistics, and would strongly encourage you to vote against the bill. If you can share a personal story for yourself, a family member, a colleague, or somebody who you serve in your job, that is very important. If they are not in their office and they're in session, you can actually go to the lobby of the House or the Senate and actually put in a request, and you can call them off the floor and they will typically come and speak with you in between votes. So that may just be a minute or 2 minutes, but at least you're having that direct communication. If you're not able to get to Oklahoma City to speak to them or to the Capitol to speak to them, then definitely writing an email or making a phone call can be helpful as well. Once you've met with them, then following up with an email or even a handwritten letter can be really important as well. Thank them for their time. Thank them for listening. An important thing to realize is you may not get your legislators to agree with you or vote for you on every issue, but it's still worth the time. Even if they vote against you, make them feel bad about doing that. It may take 1 or 2 or 3 times of voting against you. But eventually, if you are persistent, if you continue to thank them for their consideration and be persistent, then they actually may be with you over time. But each of those each of these contacts is an opportunity to strengthen a relationship and education. There's 101 House members, there are 48 senators, and there are anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 bills that are introduced every session. The obvious implication of that is that legislators cannot be experts on every issue, so they look to experts. And those experts can be state agencies, the experts can be paid lobbyists, but often the experts are citizens and advocates. And you can, with some work and persistence and patience, be the expert for your legislators on the issues that are of most interest to you. I'm going to drop a number of resources into the chat function. So if you just want to copy and paste those into a document. But I mentioned Together Oklahoma. They have a whole bunch of resources on advocacy, including one document, 7 ways to get your legislators' attention, that I have the link for, some advice for what to do and not to do on visits to the Capitol. OK Policy is a legislative primer that kind of walks through all the stages of the process. So if you're not familiar with the way things work at the Capitol, that can be very helpful. There's a link, which I think Jenna also shared, to the legislature homepage. But also there is a great app put out by the OAEC. If you download that on your phone, it will tell you who the legislators are, their email addresses, their office phone numbers. Very helpful. If you're ever at the Capitol, you definitely want to have that app. So as I always do, I talked somewhat longer than I was hoping to, but that leaves us with a few minutes before I know you're going to have to get to your next session. I'd be happy to answer questions on anything that I touched on or anything that you were hoping I touched on that I didn't get to.
So if you have any questions for Dr. Blatt, please feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Yeah. And thank you so much for all of that great information, Dr. Blatt. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. So the first thing to do, if you were somebody who did not put their hands up as to who your legislators are, is to go find that out. You go to okhouse.gov or okpolicy.org or other places, find out who your House member is, who your senator is. It's a little harder to reach out in the middle of session because they are swamped with all these bills. It's more effective to do it during the period between May and February when they're not in session to begin to develop that relationship. But if there's a bill that you care about, that you've heard about from colleagues, from NASW, from others, there is definitely still the time to have an impact. Anybody have any questions?
This is Taylor. So if you're interested in policy and social work, yeah, how can you get involved, or what direction as far as employment goes? How can you?
Yeah, I mean, there are some policy focused practicums that you can do. I know at OK Policy we had MSW practicum students on a couple of occasions. I think there's some other organizations that provide that opportunity as well, Community Service Council, Mental Health Association. So I think that's something that you can talk to your advisor about, trying to find a practicum that would be less clinical and more policy oriented. There are organizations that do summer internships. OK Policy as well did paid summer policy internships. So I think, trying to work that into your studies so that when you graduate that you have some direct hands-on would definitely be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, or take MPA electives. That's what I did.
Yes, and all of you, I'm going to be teaching a class this summer on education policy, in the fall on immigration and inequality. I think they're all going to be in person in Tulsa, but would love to have MSW students in the class. I think all the topics, particularly the inequality and immigration ones, would be quite relevant. Operators are standing by. All right.
Okay, well, if we don't have any more questions, I just want to thank Dr. Braggs and Dr. Blatt. We really appreciate all the information, and we will see you guys on the next session. And if you were looking for CEUs, there is a link in the chat for an evaluation that you can fill out. So thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll see you for the next section. All right, bye.